Bantam Doubleday Dell Audio Publishing presents The Wedding by Danielle Steele. The traffic moved along the Santa Monica Freeway at a snail's pace as Allegra Steinberg lay her head back against the seat of the midnight blue Mercedes 300. At this rate, it was going to take forever. She had nothing particular to do on the way home, but it always seemed such an incredible waste of time just sitting there in traffic. She stretched her long legs, sighed, flicked on the radio, and smiled as they started playing Bram Morrison's latest single. He was one of her clients at the law firm. She had represented him for over a year. She had a number of important clients. At 29, 4 years out of Yale Law School, she was a junior partner at Fish, Herzog, and Freeman. They were one of the most important firms in L.A., and entertainment law had always been her passion. Allegra had known years before that she wanted to go into law, and it had only been for a brief little while, after 2 years of summer stock, that she had thought she might want to be an actress. It wouldn't have surprised anyone. Her mother, Blaire Scott, had written and produced one of the most successful shows on television for 9 years. It was a comedy, well peppered with real-life drama. It had earned her mother 7 Emmys. Her father, Simon Steinberg, was a major movie producer. He had won 3 Academy Awards over the years. More importantly, he was that rarest of commodities in Hollywood. A nice man, a gentleman, a truly decent human being. He and Blaire were among the industry's most respected couples. They worked hard and had a real family, which they devoted a lot of their time to. Allegra had a 17-year-old sister, Samantha, Sam, who was a senior in high school and a model, and who, unlike Allegra, did want to be an actress. Only their brother, Scott, a junior at Stanford, seemed to have escaped show business entirely. He was in pre-med, and all he wanted in life was to be a doctor. Scott had seen enough of show business in his 20 years. He had seen the agonies the rest of his family went through dealing with spoiled, erratic stars, dishonest network people, and quixotic investors. There were highs, certainly, and perks, admittedly, and they all seemed to love what they did. But as far as Scott was concerned, they could have it. Allegra smiled to herself, thinking of him, and listening to the last of Bram's song. Even Scott had been impressed when she was able to tell him that Bram was one of her clients. He was a hero. And Carmen Connors was one of her clients, too, the Marilyn Monroe look-alike who was the decade's new blonde bombshell. She was 23 years old, from a town in Oregon the size of a dinner plate, but she was a sensational actress. She had been referred to the firm by CAA, and one of the senior partners had introduced her to Allegra. They had hit it off instantly, and now she was Allegra's baby. Literally, sometimes, but Allegra didn't mind it. Unlike Bram, who was in his late 30s and had been around the music business for 20 years, Carmen was still fairly new to Hollywood and seemed to be constantly beset by problems. Trouble with boyfriends, stalkers, publicists, hairdressers, tabloids, paparazzi, would-be agents. She was never sure how to handle any of them, and Allegra was used to getting calls from her any time, day or night. The young beauty was often terrified. She was always afraid that someone would break in and hurt her. Allegra had been able to control some of the terror with a state-of-the-art alarm and a pair of unnerving guard dogs, but Carmen still called Allegra in the middle of the night to talk out problems or just for comfort. It didn't bother Allegra, but her friends commented that she was as much babysitter as lawyer. Allegra pressed another button on her radio and then thought about Brandon as the traffic finally began to edge forward. She had the top down on her car. It was a warm January afternoon, and her long blonde hair shimmered in the last of the winter sunlight. She thought of calling Brandon at the office as she picked up speed again, but she decided to wait until she got home and relaxed for a few minutes. Like her own, his workday stayed hectic right until the bitter end. As he met with clients he had to go to court with the next day, or arrange conferences with other attorneys or judges. He was a defense attorney, a litigator, specializing in white-collar crime, real law, as he called it, not like what she did. Even Allegra had to agree that his work was as far as you could get from her practice. His personality was just as different, too. He was far more tightly coiled, much more serious, and had a more intense view of life. In the 2 years she'd been dating him, more than once her family had accused Brandon Edwards of not having much of a sense of humor. Allegra, though, valued the fact that he was both reliable and solid, and she liked the fact that he had a family. He'd been married for 10 years to a girl he'd married while he was in law school. He had gone to Bolt at UC Berkeley, and Joni had gotten pregnant. He had been forced to marry her. They'd had 2 little girls, and after law school he had gone to work for the most conservative law firm in San Francisco. It had only been by chance that they had transferred him to their L.A. office, just after he and Joni had agreed to a trial separation. He had met Allegra the 3rd week he'd been in town through a mutual friend, and they had been going out for 2 years now. Allegra loved him, and she loved his kids. Joni didn't like letting them come to L.A., so usually Brandon went to San Francisco to see them, and whenever she could, Allegra went with him. The only problem was that in 2 years Joni had still not been able to find work, and she claimed it would be too traumatic for the girls for her not to be at home for them. So she was completely dependent on Brandon, and they were still arguing about their house and their condo near Tahoe. In fact, in 2 years very little had been resolved. The divorce had not yet been filed, and the financial arrangements never completed. Allegra teased him about it from time to time, about being a lawyer who couldn't get his own wife to sign a contract. But she didn't want to push him. For the moment, it meant that their relationship had to stay where it was, comfortable, but on hold, and it could go no further until he tied up all the loose ends with Joni. The phone rang in the car as Allegra made a turn, and for a minute she hoped that it would be Brandon, but it wasn't. It was her secretary, Alice. "Carmen Connors just called," Alice told her. "I thought you'd want to know. She's very upset. She's on the cover of Chatter." It was one of the nastiest tabloids around, and they'd been eating Carmen alive for months, despite repeated warnings and threats from Allegra. "What now?" Allegra asked. "The article said something about going to an orgy with her plastic surgeon, I think." Poor Carmen. They'd had dinner at Chasen's, and according to what she told Allegra, there hadn't even been sex, let alone an orgy. "Oh, for Christ's sake," Allegra muttered, as she pulled into her driveway. "Anything else?" "Your mother called. She wanted to know if you can make it to dinner on Friday, and she wanted to be sure you're coming to the Golden Globes on Saturday." Allegra smiled. "Of course I'm going. I'll call her." Both of her parents were nominees this year, and she wouldn't miss being there for anything. She had invited Brandon to it more than a month ago, before Christmas. As she walked inside and tossed her briefcase on the couch, she noticed Brandon's running shoes. The house always seemed more lived in when he left his things there. He kept his own apartment, too, but he spent a fair amount of time with her. He liked being with her, and he told her so, but he was equally clear about not being ready to make a commitment. Marriage had just been too confining, and he was afraid to make another mistake, which was probably why he was taking so long to divorce Joni. But Allegra had everything she wanted anyway. She had told that to her therapist, Dr. Green, as well as her parents. And she was only 29. She was in no hurry to get married. She flipped the switch on her answering machine and listened to her messages. Predictably, the first one was from Carmen, and she sounded as though she'd been crying. She said something about how unfair the article was, and she didn't know if Allegra would want to sue this time, but she thought they should talk about it, and she asked Allegra to call her as soon as she had a free moment. It never occurred to Carmen that Allegra had a right to her own time. Carmen needed her for her own affairs, and that was all she ever thought of. But in spite of that, Allegra liked her. After that, there was a message from a man she'd met over the holidays. He'd been attractive and worked for an important studio. She had met him when she was with Brandon. She smiled as he left his name and said he hoped that she would call him, but there was no question of it in her mind. She was with Brandon. He was the third important love affair in her life, though also the third who had been shy of commitment, and Dr. Green sometimes pointed out that she'd never had a relationship that included any kind of promises involving her future. "I'm not sure at 29 I should have had that anyway," she had responded more than once. "I've never really wanted to get married." "Well, that's not..."
Sample complete. Ready to continue?